All right, factoring to solve polynomials. So there's two types of questions we can ask here. One is something like f of -3. Remember when the f of x changes to a number, that means the x is changing to that number. So we want to put x in for, -3 in for all the x's. That's just an evaluate problem, so we can answer that by using our calculator. You can type it in with parentheses around the number like I'm writing it here, or you can put the equation in y1 in your calculator and then do trace -3. That's always allowed for a way to evaluate for x quickly, and the answer is 72. Okay, so now the fun part. Find x. So solving. Find x when f of x equals 0. So step 1, plugging in the 0. Now remember, when factoring or solving polynomials, first you want to make sure your equation equals 0. So in this problem, we're done with that. Second step, now we're going to factor. Remember, the first step of factoring is finding out if you have a greatest common factor. If you do, you take it out. If you don't, then you skip it. And then if you have 3 terms, you do a C method. Oop, that's not a C, is it? And if you have 4 terms, then you just split it down the middle, factor by grouping. So in this problem, we have 3 terms. We have A and C. 2 times 15 is 30. So we're looking for the 2 numbers that multiply to 30 that add up to -13. So we need to pick 2 negatives, so that negative times negative turns positive. So we'll need -3 and -10. If you were thinking about -15 and +2, that would have been great, except for that would have made -30. So keep the first number, change out the -13 into -3x and -10x, and keep the last number, keep the 15. Now that we have 4 pieces, we split it down the middle and take out our 2 different greatest common factors. 2x squared and 3x have an x in common. And if we take that out, then we keep the numbers the same, but we take away one of the x's. -10x and 15 both divide by 5, but we want to change the signs around, so we're going to divide by -5. That way we leave +2x and -3, so that matches the first factor. So our 2 greatest common factors are x minus 5, that's one of our factors, and 2x minus 3 is our other. And remember, this still equaled 0. This was an equation. So now we have factored, but we need to solve. So once we have it factored, we set each factor equal to 0 and use the 0 product property to get our answers. Okay, solving. So 0 equals x minus 5. 0 equals 2x minus 3. If we add 5, then x equals 5 is a solution. And here we have to add 3 and divide by 2. And 3/2 or 1.5 is a solution. So there's a review of AC method to factor to solve. Let's try another one. Okay, y equals 11. So we start by putting our 11 in. Never solve until your equation equals 0 when you're working with powers. So 2x cubed minus 6x squared plus 3x minus 9. So now it equals 0. We ask ourselves if there's a greatest common factor. There is no number that all the numbers divide by, and not every piece has an x, so we can't divide by x. So no GCF. So now we realize it's 4 pieces long, so we go ahead and split. And take out our 2 different greatest common factors. 2x to the third and 6x squared. They can both divide by 2, and they both have at least 2 x's, so 2x squared is the GCF. Which leaves us with an x, and negative 6 divided by 2 is negative 3, so x minus 3. All right, so now 3x minus 9. 3 and 9 both divide by 3, so that's our common factor, which leaves us with x and negative 3. So our GCFs are 2x squared plus 3, that's one factor, and x minus 3 is the other, and it was still an equation equal to 0. So now we use our zero product property. We set each factor equal to 0 and solve each. All right, so this first one, we have to subtract 3. We're solving by undoing now, since we only have 1x left. We're dividing by 2, so negative 1.5, or negative 3/2. And then we're square rooting to get rid of that square. Remember when you square root that you put a plus or minus in front of every square root, so positive or negative square root of negative 1.5. So technically we just found 2 answers right there. And remember, whenever you have a negative in your square root, that your solution's really imaginary. So we want to do one more step. We want to take an imaginary number and take that negative out. Square root of 1.5. Positive or negative I times the square root of 1.5. Whew, that was a long one. Now don't forget there's this other one over here that we just have to add 3. So x equals 3 on that one. So found 3 solutions that time. The positive, the negative, and 3. Okay, let's see what else we got. All right, so on this one we plug in our 2. 2 equals. Same beginning polynomial, but we're going to have a different result because we plugged in a different value. Remember, no factoring, no solving of any type with polynomials until your equation equals to 0. Well, that's interesting. When I move my 2 over, it cancels out on both sides, so no 2 anymore. So now I ask myself, do I have a greatest common factor? And this time the answer is yes, because all of my pieces have an x in them. So 2x squared minus 6x plus 3. I lowered my powers all by 1 by factoring out that GCF. Okay, so now I try to factor again. This is 3 pieces long. When I have 3 pieces, I try AC method. 2 times 3 is 6. I'm looking for things that multiply to 6 and add to negative 6 in the center there. So 6 and 1, 2 and 3. Neither one of those do it. So this does not factor. So we have to remember our fallback plan. We have one answer here. If we set each factor equal to 0, we have 0 equals x. There's an answer. And we have 0 equals 2x squared minus 6x plus 3 that doesn't factor anymore. If something doesn't factor, you change gears to use the quadratic formula. Remember, that's x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all divided by 2a. So for this problem, since b is already negative 6, that'll turn to positive 6 when we substitute. And then we'll have negative 6 squared minus 4 times 2 times 3 all over 2 times 2. Okay, So we can do 2 times 2 is 4 for the bottom there pretty easily. And then we're going to want to grab a calculator because we're going to want to type this part right here exactly like it looks in our calculator to find out what number that is. And we find out it is 12. So if that had been a negative number in the square root, we would have had an imaginary solution. But as it stands, it's positive, so we're going to get 2 answers. Remember, typing is important here. We got to do 6 plus the square root of 12. And then press equals on our calculator before we divide by 4, which gives us 2.366. And then we have to do 6 subtract the square root of 12 and press equals before we divide by 4. And that gives us 0.6, whoops, I'm running out of space here, 634 is an answer. And so these 2 decimals are our last 2 solutions. Remember, x equals 0 way back there from our greatest common factor was our third one.